I ran away on a rainy Tuesday morning, carrying nothing but a small backpack and a heart heavier than it had ever been. The sky was gray, matching the mess inside my mind. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out of the house that had never truly felt like home. For years, I had felt invisible. My name is Daniel Harper, and until that morning, I lived in a quiet suburban town where everyone pretended everything was fine. My parents were good people, or at least that's what the neighbors thought. My father worked long hours and believed providing money was the same as providing love. My mother was always tired, always worried, always too busy to notice how silent I had become. I wasn't abused, I wasn't starved, but I was lonely in a way that no one seemed to understand. At school, I blended into the background. Teachers remembered my grades, but not my face. Friends laughed with me, but never really listened. Every day felt the same. Wake up, pretend, smile when expected, sleep with unanswered questions echoing in my head. Is this all life is going to be? Does anyone actually see me? The night before I ran away, my father yelled at me for failing a math test. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask how I felt. He just said, "You're wasting your potential." Something inside me broke. That night, I packed quietly. A hoodie, 2 shirts, some cash I had saved, and my old notebook, the one where I wrote thoughts I never dared to say out loud. When morning came, I slipped out before anyone woke up. The bus station smelled like wet concrete and cheap coffee. I bought a ticket to a city I had never visited. I didn't care where it went. I just wanted distance from expectations, from silence, from myself. The city was loud, alive, and terrifying. People rushed past me, each carrying their own stories, their own pain. For the first time, I felt small, but also free. The first few days were harder than I imagined. I slept in a cheap motel, then on park benches when my money ran low. Hunger became a constant companion. Fear followed me everywhere, especially at night. I realized quickly that running away didn't erase pain, it just changed its shape. One evening, while sitting outside a small diner, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her late 50s, with tired eyes and kind hands. "You look like someone who hasn't eaten," she said gently. Her name was Margaret. She owned the diner and offered me a meal in exchange for washing dishes. That night, I ate the best food of my life, not because it was fancy, but because someone cared whether I was hungry. Margaret didn't ask many questions, but she listened when I spoke. She told me she had run away once too, decades ago, after losing someone she loved. "Running saved me," she said, "but staying somewhere long enough to heal, that's what changed me." I started working at the diner regularly. Days turned into weeks. I found a rhythm: wake up early, work hard, sleep exhausted but peaceful. For the first time, I felt useful. I felt seen. But guilt slowly crept in. At night, I thought about my mother sitting at the kitchen table, wondering where she went wrong. I imagined my father checking my empty room when he thought no one was watching. I told myself they didn't care, but deep down, I wasn't sure that was true anymore. One afternoon, Margaret handed me a folded newspaper. There was a small missing person notice. My name stared back at me. I felt my chest tighten. "They're looking for you," she said softly. "Running away doesn't mean you don't matter. Sometimes it means you matter more than you think." That night, I didn't sleep. I realized something painful and honest. I hadn't run away because I hated my life. I ran away because I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to say, "I'm hurting." The next morning, I called home. My mother answered. She cried before I could say a word. My father took the phone later, his voice shaking as he apologized. Not perfectly, not magically, but sincerely. I didn't go back immediately. I stayed a little longer, saving money, learning who I was without the noise. Margaret hugged me tightly on my last day. "Remember," she said, "running away doesn't make you weak. Knowing when to return makes you brave." When I finally went home, things weren't suddenly perfect. We still argued, we still misunderstood each other, but now we talked, we tried. I learned that running away wasn't the end of my story, it was the chapter that taught me my worth. Sometimes you have to leave everything behind to understand what truly matters, and sometimes running away is how you find your way back. Coming back home felt stranger than running away. The house looked the same, the pale blue walls, the creaking stairs, the old clock ticking in the hallway, but I wasn't the same person who had walked out weeks ago. I stood at the doorway with my bag in my hand, unsure if I belonged there anymore. My mother hugged me tightly, as if letting go would mean losing me again. My father stood a few steps away, awkward and silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. That silence hurt more than his anger ever had. The first few days were tense. Everyone tried too hard. My mother cooked my favorite meals, asking every hour if I was okay. My father avoided serious conversations, speaking only about work or the weather. And I didn't know how to explain what had happened to me out there, how sleeping on benches and washing dishes had somehow taught me more about life than years of school. At night, I lay awake in my old bed, staring at the ceiling. The city noises were gone, replaced by the quiet hum of suburbia. I should have felt safe, but instead I felt trapped by memories of the boy who had felt invisible in this very room. School started again the following week. Whispers followed me down the hallway. Some people looked at me with curiosity, others with pity. A few friends asked questions I didn't want to answer. Teachers treated me like fragile glass, careful not to push too hard. But the hardest part wasn't school. The hardest part was facing myself. One evening, my father knocked on my door. He rarely did that before. He sat on the edge of my bed, his shoulders heavy. "I don't know how to be the kind of father you needed," he said quietly. "My dad never talked. He only worked. I thought that was enough." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to say, "You should have known better." But I remembered Margaret's words. "Healing takes staying." "I didn't run away because of you alone," I replied. "I ran away because I felt like I didn't matter." His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw him not as a distant authority, but as a flawed human being. That night, something shifted between us. Not fixed, but softened. Still, I struggled. Some days I missed the diner. I missed the simplicity of earning my place with effort, not expectations. I missed being Daniel the dishwasher, not Daniel the disappointment or Daniel the missing kid. One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Margaret. She wrote about the diner, about the regulars who asked about me, about how the city kept moving whether you stayed or left. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "You don't have to run anymore. You're allowed to build a life instead." That sentence stayed with me. Slowly, I began to change how I lived. I joined a small writing club at school, sharing pieces from my notebook for the first time. My voice shook when I read, but people listened. Some even clapped. It felt unreal. I started talking more at home, too. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. When things hurt, I said so. When I felt overwhelmed, I admitted it. Sometimes my parents understood. Sometimes they didn't. But they tried. And so did I. One night, my mother confessed, "When you disappeared, I realized I had been loving you quietly when you needed me loudly." We all cried that night. Months passed. Life didn't turn into a perfect story. I still had bad days. I still felt the urge to escape when things got heavy. But now, instead of running, I walked. I wrote. I talked. I stayed. I learned that running away had given me distance, but staying gave me growth. On my 18th birthday, I visited the bus station again. I stood where I had once waited with fear and hope tangled in my chest. This time, I didn't buy a ticket. I just stood there, breathing, knowing I had a choice. Freedom, I realized, isn't about leaving everything behind. It's about knowing you can leave and choosing where you belong. I ran away once to survive. Now, I stay to live. The urge to run never completely disappears. That was the truth I learned slowly. Even after months of staying, of trying, of rebuilding, there were moments when everything inside me screamed to escape. A harsh word, a failed exam, a look of disappointment. Old habits don't die easily. They wait quietly for the right moment. One such moment came on a winter evening. I had been accepted into a local college, but it wasn't the one everyone expected. My father tried to hide it, but I saw it in his eyes. The question he didn't ask. Couldn't you do better? That night, the house felt heavy again.
I went to my room, opened my backpack, the same one I had taken when I ran away, and found my old notebook. The pages were worn, filled with messy handwriting, fear, anger, hope. I read words written by a boy who believed disappearing was the only way to be heard. For the first time, I spoke to that version of myself. "You are brave," I whispered, "but you don't have to save me anymore." The next morning, instead of walking out, I sat at the breakfast table. "I'm scared," I said suddenly. Both my parents looked up, surprised. "I'm scared I'll fail again. I'm scared I'll disappoint you. And sometimes, I'm scared I'll run." The room was silent. Then my father said something I never expected. "So am I." He admitted his fear of being a bad father, of not knowing how to guide without controlling. My mother admitted she had mistaken silence for strength. It wasn't a perfect conversation. It was messy, emotional, real. And real was enough. College life wasn't easy. Balancing studies, part-time work, and expectations tested me daily. But this time, when things felt overwhelming, I reached out instead of shutting down. I wrote more. I shared my story at a small open mic event on campus. When I finished reading, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then many. After the event, a stranger came up to me and said, "I thought I was the only one who ever wanted to run." In that moment, I understood something powerful. My story wasn't just mine anymore. A year later, I returned to the city where I had once been lost. The diner was still there. Margaret was still behind the counter, smiling like she had been waiting for me all along. "You look different," she said. "I stayed," I replied. She nodded. "That's harder than leaving." We talked for hours. Before I left, I handed her a printed copy of my first published essay. She held it like it was something fragile and precious. As I walked away, I realized I wasn't running toward something anymore. I was walking forward. Now, when people ask me about the time I ran away, I don't lower my voice. I don't feel ashamed, because I know the truth. I ran away to survive. I came back to heal. I stayed to grow. And if someday I feel lost again, I know this. Running isn't failure, but learning where and who you belong to, that's courage. This time, I didn't run. This time, I chose my life. Years later, when people asked me where my strength came from, I never gave them a simple answer. Strength didn't arrive all at once. It grew quietly, in late-night conversations, in pages filled with honest words, in moments when running felt easier than staying, and I chose to stay anyway. I graduated college with a degree that didn't impress everyone, but it belonged to me. I worked part-time, wrote at night, and slowly built a life that felt real. Not perfect. Real. My relationship with my parents changed in ways I never imagined. My father learned to listen without fixing. My mother learned to speak without fear. We didn't erase the past, but we stopped letting it control us. On a quiet afternoon, my first book was published. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't change the world overnight. But letters came, messages from strangers who said, "Your words sounded like my life." And every time I read those lines, I remembered the boy at the bus station with a backpack and a broken heart. One evening, I returned to my old room and found the notebook where it all began. On the last page, I wrote one final sentence. I didn't run away to disappear. I ran away to find myself. Looking back, I understand something I didn't know then. Sometimes people don't run because they are weak. They run because staying silent hurts more than leaving. But healing doesn't come from distance alone. It comes from courage. The courage to return, to speak, to remain present even when it's hard. I ran away once. It saved my life. But staying taught me how to live.